This has in fact been a generational debate, Mr. Speaker. Many in this place will not know that we've been debating supertanker bans off the north coast of British Columbia for 42 years in the House of Commons. This House passed a motion 42 years ago by one of my predecessors, Frank Howard, to do just this very thing. The then Liberal government later on brought a voluntary prevention of shipping oil in this manner. And just 4 years ago, the House passed a New Democratic motion to protect the Northwest, protect the North Coast, and to say no to Enbridge Northern Gateway. It's been 42 years. It's time to have a definitive declaration from the House of Commons and to find out, particularly from my BC colleagues across the way, who exactly they work for. Because I have been touring British Columbia from edge to edge and north to south, talking to hundreds and thousands of British Columbians at over 30 town halls, Vancouver Island, Vancouver itself, up through the north and into the interior, packing rooms, church basements, community centers, town halls. British Columbians from right across the political spectrum are turning out, signing thousands upon thousands of pages of petitions that have been flooding into my office, participating online through Lead Now and Avaz, and the Dogwood Initiative, raising their voices because they can't seem to get the attention of their members of Parliament if they happen to be conservative on this issue. Now, this should know no partisan bounds. This isn't about right and left. This is about right and wrong. And we know that in defense of home, we are always in the right. When we know we try to take an opportunity to improve the way we do things in this country, that is right. And anybody that thinks in 2014 you can simply fire up the bulldozers and ram these projects through communities against their will, against the First Nations who have right and title on the land, is somebody living in another fantasy world. Because in 2006, this Prime Minister declared for all the world to hear that Canada would become an energy superpower. We all remember it. Well, all these years on, how are they doing? Every major energy transportation project is mired in controversy. The latest on Burnaby Mountain in Burnaby, just outside of Vancouver, where a company that wants to build a multi-billion-dollar pipeline can't even get their GPS coordinates right when seeking an injunction through the courts. And the people stand up. Of course they stand up. This is a tradition in Canada. This is a welcome tradition in Canada, that when a government refuses to listen, the people come together and join their voices one to the other. And there is a better way to do things. Now, up north, we call it the Skeena model, where First Nations sit down with industry, and industry recognizes the right and title to that land, and works from the values up, incorporating who we are as a people, as opposed to the top-down, Ottawa knows best conservative model that says, we're just going to tell you what's going to happen to you. And if you have the audacity to raise your voice, if you have the temerity to suggest that this Prime Minister and his oil executive friends know better than those of us who live with the resources, those of us who live in the communities that will be impacted and affected, well, then we're going to try to silence you. We're going to change the laws of the whole country in order to silence you. We'll push people out of the conversation rather than welcome them in, rather than use the intelligence. And so what's the reaction been? Twice now, the Union of BC Municipalities has passed resolutions against this pipeline. Twice. The Fraser Declaration, more than 130 First Nations across British Columbia came together, put their differences aside, and said this way of doing business is wrong. This pipeline is wrong for First Nations in this province and in this country. And we've seen municipalities right across the Northwest, towns that are based in resource development and have been for generations, who understand the extractive economy, but know that the risks of what Enbridge is proposing and is supported by this Conservative government are wrong. And from Prince Rupert and Haida Gwaii to Terrace to the site in Kitimat where this pipeline is supposed to land, Smithers, Hazelton, on down the line, communities have passed resolutions at their municipal level against this project. Now, you think all this would matter to the Conservatives across the way, but not as yet. They haven't quite been able to hear their constituents. They haven't quite been able to hear the people of British Columbia, who just last year were polled on supertankers off the North Coast, and 80% said no. And a small indication to my Conservative colleagues, 1 in 5 of those British Columbians who voted Conservative in the last election said they'd switch their vote. So if we can't make an economic argument that the Conservatives are willing to listen to, that raw export is a bad thing for the Canadian resource economy, if we can't make a moral argument that standing against people who have stood up and presented their voices in calm and peaceful ways, if we can't make the legal argument that you're not going to get this thing through, the objection of First Nations who have just so recently proved their case at the Supreme Court through the Silkatine decision, that rights and title must be honored. If we can't convince the Conservatives on any of those fronts, then certainly we can convince them of the politics. Because that's something this Prime Minister claims to pay a lot of attention to. And I can remember the day when the Conservatives gave their tacit approval to this pipeline, and Lord help the media who were out there trying to get one Conservative MP from British Columbia to make one comment about how enthusiastic they were for this pipeline. They couldn't find a one. They did find one, actually, after a few days of hunting, and his message was, well, don't worry, this pipeline won't be built anyways. What kind of government operates this way? What kind of integrity is this? What happened to standing up for Canada? Now, the threat is real. When a government has so lost its way that it feels it does not derive its power and its authority and its legitimacy from the people of this country, that the threat to our economy, just in the Northwest alone, it's $140 million per year, wild salmon economy. Across British Columbia, that's $1.7 billion from the seafood industry and recreation, 1.5 through tourism, which is almost wholly based on the appreciation of what British Columbia is, which is a magnificent place, a beautiful place, a place that we all as Canadians treasure, those certainly of us who live there, but even more so broadly in the imagination and hearts and minds of Canadians. So through all of this, we launched the campaign TakeBackOurCoast.ca, and thousands upon thousands of average, ordinary, everyday British Columbians have been signing on, joining, encouraging their friends to participate, and know and believe in one hopeful idea, that we still have something akin to representative government that seeks to represent the people rather than some narrow interests. A government that, if you plead with them on the moral, on the legal, on the ethical, on the economic level, and ultimately, I suppose, on the political level, that we can sway even this government when it comes to oil and the oil industry to do the right thing. I believe in my heart of hearts, Mr. Speaker, that there are friends across the way. I thank the support we've heard from the Liberal Party and from the Greens. I believe in my heart of hearts that there's members across the way that can understand the importance of getting this right, of having an energy policy that actually fits with Canadian values, and that in this day and age we can do better than what we've seen so far. In this day and age we can learn to respect First Nations, respect citizens when they come forward, and understand that this project, as designed by Northern Gateway, is not in the interests of this country, certainly not in the interests of the people that I represent, and there is a better way, one that seeks to respect those that send us here, one that seeks to respect rights and title, one that seems to respect, finally, the balance and the harmony we seek with the environment in which we live. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments?